This program is made possible by the National Endowment for the Arts, with additional funding from the Maryland Humanities Council and Equestrian Sports and Promotion. Horsing Around, with Pulitzer Prize-winning poets Maxine Kumin and Henry Taylor.
Hello, I'm Henry Taylor. Welcome to The Writing Life. I'm usually a host on this series, and I will try to maintain some order as we proceed. But Maxine Kumin and I are colleagues today. A number of years ago, when Maxine Kumin was consultant in poetry to the Library of Congress, she was asked to give a reading at a venue in Washington, D.C. Garvin's it was, a place on Connecticut Avenue that's mostly devoted to comedy, a fact of which I think Maxine was unaware at the time. And the deal was that she was asked to bring along a younger poet in a kind of protege situation, and she asked me if I would mind being thought of in that way, and I said I would be delighted. And I knew about Garvin's. And I said, you know, it's a comedy club. And Maxine said, it is. I said, it's all right. They have a poetry series there. But I think, since we both have spent so much time around horses and write about horses every now and then, we should dress up in riding clothes and go to Garvin's and read horse poems to them. And Maxine hesitated only briefly before. And it was, you were really game. I've always admired you for that. So that's what we did.
Yeah, we had a good time,
and
as I recall. It was fun.
Oh, it was a lot of fun. It led, Ellen Kennedy was there, and it led her to, that's what caused her to think about possibly having a reading on horseback sometime. You know, she said that to me. Wouldn't it be fun to have a reading on horseback? And I thought to myself, that's complete insanity. It could never happen. So I said, maybe so. And that's a long and other story, but it did happen. I thought I would start off with a kind of slighter poem, an anecdote poem. It's based actually on probably 3 or 4 different things that people have said at various times that I've overheard in the process of growing up around horses. It's called Riding Lesson. I learned 2 things from an early riding teacher. He held a nervous filly in one hand and gestured with the other, saying, listen, keep one leg on one side, the other leg on the other side, and your mind in the middle. He turned and mounted. She took 2 steps, then left the ground, I thought for good, but she came down hard, humped her back, swallowed her neck, threw her rider as you'd throw a rock. He rose, brushed his pants and caught his breath and said, see, that's the way to do it. When you see they're gonna throw you, get off.
Oh, it's delicious. That's really a delicious poem.
Thanks.
Yeah. Well, since you started with something humorous, I probably will start with something not quite so humorous. This is the title poem from Looking for Luck. It's about bears, it's about a lot of things, but it's also about horses. And it's based on a Kiowa Indian legend that I'm grateful to Scott Momaday for writing about this. It's called Credo. I believe in magic. I believe in the rights of animals to leap out of our skins as recorded in the Kiowa legend. Directly there was a bear where the boy had been. As I believe in the resurrected wake robin, first wet knob of trillium to knock in April at the underside of Earth's door in central New Hampshire, where bears are, though still denned up at that early greening. I believe in living on grateful terms with the earth, with the black crumbles of ancient manure that sift through my fingers when I top-dress the garden for winter. I believe in the wet strings of earthworms aroused out of season, and in the bear, asleep now in the rock cave where my outermost pasture abuts the forest. I seed him a swale of chokecherries in August. I give the sow and her cub as much yardage as they desire when our paths intersect, as does my horse shifting under me, respectful but not cowed by our encounter. I believe in the gift of the horse, which is magic. Their deep fear snorts in play when the wind comes up, the ballet of nip and jostle, plunge and crow hop. I trust them to run from me, necks arched in a full swan's S, tails cocked up over their backs like plumes on a cavalier's hat. I trust them to gallop back, skid to a stop, their nostrils level with my mouth, asking for my human breath, that they may test its intent, taste the smell of it. I believe in myself as their sanctuary, and the earth with its summer plumes of carrots, its clamor of peas, beans, masses of tendrils as mine. I believe in the acrobatics of boy into bear, the grace of animals in my keeping, the thrust to go on.
That's wonderful. It's writers are supposed to have good imaginations, but I really do think that you and I are lucky to have these friends that that don't use language at all, and to learn how to communicate with them in something completely other than words, I think is for a writer an immensely wonderful gift. A long time ago, I watched a couple of people trying to see if they were going to get away with continuing to show a very successful show hunter who had lost the sight of one eye in some way that didn't change the appearance, the external appearance of the eyeball. This would have been illegal if they had succeeded in doing this. But they were schooling the horse and trying to see whether they could ride him without letting anyone know that they were trying to be very careful to make sure that the horse's one functional eye was aware that the jumps were coming. They gave up. They didn't, without hurting the horse, I'm happy to say. They decided they just didn't have the nerve not to have him going sort of with one side of his head toward the jump. But that image stayed with me, and I thought about it for a long time and didn't know what it was about. And I finally wrote this poem called Riding a One-Eyed Horse. One side of his world is always missing. You may give it a casual wave of the hand or rub it with your shoulder as you pass, but nothing on his blind side ever happens. Hundreds of trees slip past him into darkness, drifting into a hollow hemisphere whose sounds you will have to try to explain. Your legs will tell him not to be afraid if you learn never to lie. Do not forget to turn his head and let what comes come seen. He will jump the fences he has to if you swing toward them from the side that he can see and hold his good eye straight. The heavy dark will stay beside you always. Let him learn to lean against it. It will steady him and see you safely through diminished fields.
That's really a delightful poem. I'm very moved by that poem.
Thanks.
Because it talks, it really speaks to this issue of trust. And reading the Budiansky book about the nature of horses, he talks about vision and the fact that the horse has to carry in his mind the image of the jump because he only gets one glimpse of it, and that's from before the takeoff. He doesn't see that jump again.
Right.
So it's really asking an immense
That's
amount.
the Budiansky book is this is fairly
That's the
new
one, yeah.
very scientific book about how
very
horses.
interesting book. You would enjoy it.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet, but I really want to. I've read
Yeah.
it. I've read about it.
Yeah, it's good. Well, the issue of trust and building confidence and so on. I think I'd like to read this found poem. And you know where I found it because you interceded for me to get permission from David O'Connor, whose story it is, to make it into a poem.
This turned out not to be as necessary as you thought. He
was quite receptive.
When I called him up, he not only was quite receptive, he knew something about who you were and thought, oh, that was very flattering, and so it was fine.
Well, this is really his story, and I found it, in an article. Apparently, this is pretty much his language in this interview. But when I read about it, I thought, this is exactly what it's like writing a poem. So the poem is called Ars Poetica, a found poem. Whenever I caught him down in the stall, I'd approach. At first he jumped up the instant he heard me slide the bolt. Then I could get the door open while he stayed lying down, and I'd go in on my hands and knees and crawl over to him so that I wouldn't appear so threatening. It took 6 or 8 months before I could simply walk in and sit with him, but I needed that kind of trust. I kept him on a long rein to encourage him to stretch out his neck and back. I danced with him over 10 or 15 acres of fields with a lot of flowing from one transition to another. What I've learned is how to take the indirect route. That final day, I felt I could have cut the bridle off. He went so well on his own. And I love the iambic pentameter of those last 2 lines. I mean, to find that in an interview was really
amazing.
Gorgeous.
Yeah. I spent more time after I stopped. I don't ride very much anymore, sort of when I can. I'm not nearly as active with horses as you are these days. And I find myself still, though, thinking about it and pondering what the contribution is, how to talk about or think about or write about the contribution that that riding made to my writing life. It's very difficult to find the words because it really is about this wordless this trust that you develop. Right. I mean, O'Connor, who is a wonderful Olympic 3-day rider, for him to have that kind of patience is an unusual characteristic in highly competitive Olympic level riders. It's a very impressive thing. I did rely heavily once on equestrian terminology for a poem called The Flying Change. When a horse canters or gallops, as you know, but maybe not all of our viewers do, one front foot is ahead of the other, like this, and the hind feet are behaving similarly. And there's a moment when all 4 feet are off the ground. And in that moment, if the horse wants to, it can rearrange the legs in such a way as to, it's going along on this lead, this being the lead, the one in front, and it gets up here, and it can come down on the other lead. And it's a natural move. It's a thing that foals do almost within days of being born. As soon as they're out of a trot, they're able to do this because horses like to be on the inside lead when they go around a turn. It balances them better. Teaching a horse to do it when you ask for it, when you want it done, is a matter for more patience and forbearance, I guess. And
tremendous skill on the part of the rider, Henry. Let's point this out, too.
Yeah, I guess so. It takes a long time, anyway. And so I wrote this poem. When I first wrote it, in fact, the first part of it, which is a prose paragraph, was disguised as an epigraph. I had pretended that I'd found it in an imaginary book about dressage, and I'd made up a title and an author and everything. And I took it to a little workshop that involved Linda Paston and Myra Scleroux, and Bill Stafford was there. And Bill Stafford's, people said, boy, you were lucky to find that epigraph. That's a wonderful paragraph, and kept talking like that. And finally somebody said, how did you find it? And then I had to confess. I would have had to actually lie. And Bill looked at it and said, well, if you get rid of the first 4 stanzas and replace them with that paragraph, you'll have a pretty deft little poem there. And instantly I saw that he was right. And I took a pen and went X like this over these 4 stanzas, which were rhymed, just like the ones that are left. I think I horrified some folks that night with the ease with which I threw these stanzas away, but I'm glad I did. So the first part's a paragraph. The Flying Change. The canter has 2 stride patterns, one on the right lead and one on the left, each a mirror image of the other. The leading foreleg is the last to touch the ground before the moment of suspension in the air. On cantered curves, the horse tends to lead with the inside leg. Turning at liberty, he can change leads without effort during the moment of suspension. But a rider's weight makes this more difficult. The aim of teaching a horse to move beneath you is to remind him how he moved when he was free. A single leaf turns sideways in the wind in time to save a remnant of the day. I am lifted like a whip crack to the moves I studied on that barbered stretch of ground before I schooled myself to drift away from skills I still possess but must outlive. Sometimes when I cup water in my hands and watch it slip away and disappear, I see that age will make my hands a sieve. But for a moment, the shifting world suspends its flight and leans toward the sun once more, as if to interrupt its mindless plunge through works and days that will not come again. I hold myself immobile in bright air, sustained in time, astride the flying change.
Such a fantastic metaphor, you know. I mean, it really opens out. That poem goes wide.
Thank you.
It's beautiful the way it does
that
it.
phrase is so evocative.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I never thought about it as long as I was around horses. I knew what it meant. I never thought about it having any power.
But it has enormous resonance when you develop it this
what
way.
it can do.
So I'd love to see those early stanzas sometime, Henry.
Well, they may be lurking around in some not yet purged file, but they weren't very good. Actually, they weren't as good as that paragraph.
Well, I'm going to read a birth poem. I spent 21 days sleeping on the sawdust pile in the barn waiting for this foal to be born, and this mare just clung to this baby.
Gracious.
Yeah, she
3
was
weeks.
Well, I moved down a week before due date, and then she was 2 weeks overdue. So, and you know that the gestation period in horses is 11 months.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we named this baby Praise Be, as in Praise Be it's a filly as opposed to a colt.
And has arrived.
And yes, she has arrived in many ways. Praise Be. 11 months, 2 weeks in the womb, and this one sticks a foreleg out, frail as a dowel, quivering in the unfamiliar air. And then the other leg cocked at the knee at first, then straightening, and here's the head, a big blind fish thrashing inside its see-through sack. And for a moment the panting mare desists, lies still as death. I tear the call, look into eyes as innocent, as skittery as minnows. 3 heaves, the shoulders pass. The hips emerge, fluid as snakes the hind legs trail out glistering. The whole astonished filly, still attached, draws breath and whinnies a treble tremolo that leaps in her mother, who nickers a low-key response. Let them prosper, the dams and their sucklings. Let nothing inhibit their heedless growing. Let them raise up on sturdy pasterns and trot out in light summer rain onto the long, lazy, unfenced fields of heaven.
That's lovely. This horse you still have this horse?
Oh yeah, this horse is now an 8-year-old, and she's wonderful to ride and drive. She has turned into a fabulous carriage horse.
You mostly drive now.
I do mostly drive. Arthritis has caught up with me, and I ride some, but you know, not those long 6-hour distance rides we used to do. I ride for 30 or 45 minutes, and once I can heave that right leg over, I'm okay, but after a while it begins to really cramp up on me. But the driving has been wonderful because it's a very interesting and subtle way to, you know, because it's all voice. You have only your hands and your voice. And this, you know, whip that you can use in desperate moments, but that really mostly you just carry and perhaps lay across your horse's flank to indicate which way you're going to turn next.
It's informative, not threatening, if you use it right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and you really have to have tremendous rapport with a horse that you're driving, because you have to exhibit 3 kinds of trot. You know, you have to do a slow trot and a working trot and a lengthened trot, all by voice.
We were talking at lunch about the fact that you can get an extended trot
Right.
out of a driving horse. I mean, I understand myself how you,
Get it
over
under
time, how
saddle.
you get it with a saddle and you
Yeah.
have your legs in your hands and your seat bones and you can do this.
Right.
It's mysterious to me, really, to think about how you would persuade a driving horse to do that. But
Well,
I guess if I were around it long enough, I might eventually figure it out.
yeah.
I don't know.
Well, you come visit and we'll go driving.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I'll read an early poem, speaking of taking lessons. This is a kind of sestina. A sestina is a poem that has, as you know, the same end words in 6 stanzas. The words at the ends of the lines are repeated, and that's a substitute for rhyme. The order of the end words here is not according to Hoyle.
We're going to report you to the Sestina police.
Well, as a matter of fact, Joe Kennedy used it in a very early edition of his textbook.
Really?
And said, "This is a sestina, what are its rules?" And I wrote to Joe and said,
I broke the rules.
This question can't be answered by looking at this poem. So he took it out. I should have kept He did replace it with something else. Remembering Kevin Mackenzie. Once upon a time, I spent a summer at a camp for children far from here, teaching riding to young boys and girls. I taught them to make a horse go straight, the way to make a horse stand still. They grew and danced like weeds before my eyes. Now there remains in my mind's eye one face of all the faces of that summer. It smiles at me, and I sit here wondering what's become of all the girls that Kevin Mackenzie hounded straight to earth and may be chasing still. Every week there was a dance, and still I can recall the roll of those girls' eyes as they hunted love, the first of summer. Kevin, refusing to dance, stood straight by the wall and dared the girls to rout him from his sanctuary here. Later, he began to dress with care, and here I remember the guarded gleam in his eye as he came through the door and went straight for the oldest and prettiest girl, one of the counselors. While with that stare that disturbs me still, the young girls hunted the first love of summer. In the arms of that tall breath of summer, he danced and looked her waist in the eye. I whispered then, "Be cheerful, girls, the sunshine boys are here." When the music at last grew still, the tall girl smiled, once more stood straight. The days of dancing and love rode straight to the last long week of that summer. When I said goodbye to my boys and girls, I stood among them with tears in my eyes, while Kevin Mackenzie, smiling still, said, "You must be glad to get out of here." Now I sit here in another summer, and rising straight in my mind's eye, Kevin and his girls are dancing still. I realize every time I read that poem that it's a terrible kind of casual, offhanded piece of bravado to say, I taught them to make a horse go straight, the way to make a horse stand still. The two very hardest things.
Right. Yeah, and in driving, going straight is really the key.
Yeah.
You know, to get, for example, to get that lengthen across the diagonal. You
And
have
to
be
stay,
perfect,
keep
kind of
them
stay
on
straight.
track.
Yeah.
They tend to drift into two tracks
Right.
a little, don't they?
Right. Yeah.
When the hind feet follow the front feet a little, not quite directly behind.
Straight lines is where
Straight
it
lines,
is.
Yeah, it really is.
Well, I'm gonna read this poem, which is homage to my husband, my Chores poem from
Oh, fair.
Connecting the
Yeah,
Dots.
great. Yeah. So,
I feel I have to read this. This
Yep.
is about, we bed on green pine sawdust, and it's an annual chore to fill this one straight stall that we use for the bedding. It's a tractor trailer load, really, and it takes forever. So we usually assemble 5 or 6 people and we make a party out of it, like a quilting bee, and you know, it's beer and shovel and beer. But this particular year, everyone melted away and there was no one to help with this dreadful day. Chores. All day he's shoveled green pine sawdust out of the trailer truck into the chute. From time to time he's clambered down to even the pile. Now his hair is frosted with sawdust. Little rivers of sawdust pour out of his boots. I hope in the afterlife there's none of this stuff, he says, stripping nude in the late September sun, while I broom off his jeans, his sweater flocked with granules, his immersed in sawdust socks. I hope there's no bedding, no stalls, no barn, no more repairs to the paddock gate the horses burst through when snow avalanches off the roof. Although the old broodmare, our first foal, is his, horses, he's fond of saying, make divorces. 50 years married, he's safely facetious. No garden pump that's airbound, no window a grouse flies into and shatters, no ancient tractor's intractable problem with carburetor, ignition, or piston, no mowers, and no chainsaws that refuse to start or start, misfire, and quit. But after a Bloody Mary on the terrace, already frost-heaved, despite our heroic efforts to level the bricks a few years back, he says, let's walk up to the field and catch the sunset. And off we go, a couple of aging fools. I hope, he says, on the other side there's a lot less work, but just in case, I'm bringing tools.
Oh, that's terrific. That's just wonderful.
It was fun to write.
Yeah. Well, Victor does ride a little.
Oh, he rides.
Yeah.
He's still riding Boomer, our firstborn, our first foal. She's 21 this year, and we broke her to drive. She is quite nicely drivable, but mostly on the flat. She doesn't have the hocks now to take that cart up and down steep hills, and that's mostly what we have.
Mm-hmm.
But no, she and he are tremendously bonded.
That's great.
Yeah, which is nice.
Well, I think we have time for one rapid exchange in this little horsing around here. I'll read one called Breakings. A lunge line is a line that you work the horse around you in a circle with. Long before I first left home, my father tried to teach me horses, land, and sky, to show me how his kind of work was done. I studied how to be my father's son, but all I learned was, when the wicked die, they ride combines through barley forever. Every summer I hated my father as I drove hot horses through dusty grass, and so I broke with him and left the farm for other work, where unfamiliar weather broke on my head an unexpected storm, and things I had not studied came to pass. So nothing changes, nothing stays the same, and I have returned from a broken home alone to ask for a job breaking horses. I watch a colt on a lunge line making tracks in dust, and think of the kinds of breakings there are, and the kinds of restraining forces.
Yes, that's something I can really, really relate to. Having taken it, well, as you know, we once took in a horse that I bought from the slaughterer.
Yep.
And this is really her poem, although her name was Taboo, but I did this cycle of poems called the Amanda poems because I thought Amanda was a better American name. This poem is called This poem is called Amanda Dreams She Has Died and Gone to the Elysian Fields. This morning Amanda lies down during breakfast. The hay is hip high. The sun sleeps on her back as it did on the spine of the dinosaur, the fossil bat, the first fish with feet she was once. A breeze fans the deer flies from lighting. Only a gaggle of gnats housekeeps in her ears. A hay plume sticks out of her mouth. I come calling with a carrot from which I have taken the first bite. She startles, she considers rising, but retracts the pistons of her legs and accepts as loose-lipped as a camel. We sit together. In this time and place we are heart and bone. For an hour we are incorruptible.
Oh, that's marvelous. That's lovely. Thanks for coming.
Oh,
appreciate
thanks
it. It's been a lot
thanks
of
for
fun.
sharing. This was
Thanks.
fun to do. We could be Garvins again any
Great.
old time.
And thank you for joining us again on The Writing Life.